Okay, so hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Buy Yourself Flowers Project. Once again, my name is Anya, and today I will be interviewing Miss Kellie McElhaney, the founder of the Center of Equity, Gender, and Leadership at Berkeley, and a distinguished teaching fellow on the topic of intersection between mental health and impact leadership. Okay, let's get started. Okay, so my first question for you, when did you first get interested into equity fluent leadership? What does that mean to you? It said that you developed that concept basically. And basically like what was your journey behind starting like this center at Berkeley? And yeah, like what's your background basically?
I'll skip through some early life things, but it's very important to ground it in the fact that my father was one of the original authors of Title IX, which gave
Oh.
women and men equal access first to collegiate sports, but then ultimately to feeling safe on campus, to having protection, physical protection on campus. So that was ingrained in me from a really young age. And then just fast forward, I got into, after my master's degree, banking. And it was a very male-dominated profession. In fact, sadly, it still is.
Mm-hmm.
So I just started to notice two things. My experience as a female at the bank was very different from my male colleagues,
Oh.
but I absolutely embraced the power of capitalism. I'm not at all anti-capitalistic. I just
Mm-hmm.
really started to wonder, could capitalism also be a force for positive change? And that really, I became fascinated. I had a great experience in banking, but it didn't fulfill sort of my need to contribute positively to society. I was basically making a lot of money for people who already had a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
So I started teaching on a volunteer basis so that I
Mm-hmm.
could continue to get the banking experience in a men's prison. And I was
Oh.
really helping these prisoners bring out their lived experience and share their stories. And
Mm-hmm.
it just was like this light bulb went on, and I thought, this is what I want to do. Not specific. And then I went to China for a year to teach at a university just to test those waters. And in fact, I loved the whole classroom experience, and I was really good in that environment. So my first job after my PhD was at University of Michigan, where I started an environmental MBA program.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was a great program. It was for graduate students who wanted an MBA, but also a master's of science in environmental science. And the program exploded. I think it was the right time for the generation at that moment in time of graduate students who wanted to use also their power to create positive change. Again, just skipping through a lot of years, I was recruited here to the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley to start a center that could teach undergraduate business school students and graduate business school students um, really how they could both be successful in the business world and also contribute positively to society. And again, it just was explosively successful. But I went back to this thought of gender equity and women in leadership, and do women lead differently, not better or worse, but just differently than men. And in fact,
Mm-hmm.
I found that when a company has one or more, because at that stage my data set was quite small in terms of women on boards. I was looking at women on boards and women in the executive suite.
Mm-hmm.
What I found is when companies had one or more, ideally 25% females,
Mm-hmm.
company gave more philanthropically. The company had an eye more on water reduction, waste reduction, positive environmental influence, as well as an eye towards fair employee treatment all the way into the factories in Asia and Southeast Asia, and making sure that they were able to work under healthy working conditions. And then the final step of my journey was to start EGAL as really a way to teach our business school students to always be successful business leaders, because that's at the core of what we do as a business school, but um, to also promote inclusion while they are developing and becoming successful leaders. And
Mm-hmm.
sort of that's a fast win story to how I got to where I am today.
When I was reading your bio and stuff, like I learned that you were like also a mother to two teenage daughters. I was wondering how parenting, I guess, has shaped your perspective on mental health and gender equity. And also like at Berkeley, you teach college-aged kids, but like maybe like how that's sort of changed your perspective on that, if it has.
Well, it's a really good question, Anya, because I think I sometimes had a different lens as a mother, particularly a mother of two daughters.
Yeah.
So, from a positive perspective, I really started to see the negative impact of societal pressure, of social media
Oh,
on
yeah.
both of my daughters' self-esteem, view of themselves physically, and bit
Yeah.
jarring as a mom. In parallel, I really started to see mental health struggles, particularly with undergraduates in my classroom,
Hmm.
worsening over time. And of course, the impact of COVID and, shelter in place and all of that. It just, gosh, I was so jarred by the mental health struggles of my undergraduate students. And then I started to think, my gosh, my daughters are undergraduate students as well at UCLA and Oregon.
Oh, wow. Okay, so they're not teenage daughters anymore. Now they're like they graduated. Oh, wow. Okay.
Both graduated from college. And just a funny story. They were both academically very successful, but the
Mhm.
older put a lot of pressure on herself.
Oh.
I could see when she was burned out, and I would say, "Hey, Isabel, we're going to take a mental health day tomorrow." She would push back. Like she used to say, "Mommy, how can you, of all people, as a professor, tell me
Yeah.
that back from schoolwork?" And I said, because you will be better the day after if you just have some downtime. My younger daughter was like, "Sweet, we're going to stay in pajamas all day." And she was a little more accepting of the fact that just because you take a mental health day doesn't mean you're any less of a performer. In fact,
Hmm.
high performance athletes take mental health breaks and
Yeah.
physical health breaks. But I definitely, so I've always had an eye on it with them. There is also a lot of depression genetically in my family. So I also was pretty hyper vigilant to look for signs in them and
Hmm.
just be more proactive. It's harder in the classroom because my role in a classroom is to impart academic knowledge.
Yeah.
I'm not a mental health provider, right? I have a lot
Yeah.
of experience, both with my own journey and my family's journey. And there are people in my family who took their own life. So very deep mental health
Hmm.
experiences in my family. But I
Hmm.
can't do that. I can only in the classroom both role model and try to be vulnerable and forthcoming about, to destigmatize mental health and my journey. It took me a long time to feel safe enough, or I guess I'd say confident enough to start to share my journey. That did not happen until the past probably 10 years. But by doing that, it really gave my students, like they view me as a successful person, right? I'm a professor at the number one, and I highlight number one public institution in the country.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously am required by my professional responsibility to
Mhm.
notice signs, either reach out to mental health services if I was really nervous, and or to really encourage my students to take advantage of, all of the mental health services that we offer on campus. So
Mhm.
I'm just hyper aware of the pressures that younger people, the mounting pressures that I did not deal with as a younger person. I didn't see daily horrific news of wars and famine and, because there was no social media and very little constant bombarding of negative news, I
Yeah.
just didn't have as hard of a path. There's just no way my path was as hard as your path is right now.
I'm a marketing kid too, so obviously I love social media as a tool for good and for connecting people. But it's also definitely had some significant like impacts on my mental health. Personally, I can definitely attest to that. It can spread good very easily, but it can also spread bad very, very easily. I was gonna ask, oh yeah, so how do you think leaders in school place in the workplace, you talked a little bit about how like you're sort of like, empowering your students to be successful business leaders, but also like be more inclusive. So I was wondering like maybe what advice you give them, how you think they can do that, how you advise them to just overall be a more like conscious leader, I guess.
And one thing I'll say that I noticed in my corporate audience is COVID really doing? Because everybody's mental health suffered,
Oh
you know,
yeah.
for different reasons and in different ways. But I started to notice my senior male leaders in the classroom
Mm-hmm.
become vulnerable and talk about their own anxiety or the struggles that they were facing with their kids.
Mhm.
Just even bringing more of their fatherhood into the workplace because they too are trying to remote work and help run a math class with their
Yeah.
kids for eighth grade. So that was really beautiful.
Oh.
In fact, I think men were faster to the vulnerability because women can get a double penalty for
Oh yeah.
showing anything except extreme strength.
Mm-hmm.
I know the data so deeply. So in the United States, transgender individual of color suffers the most from severe negative health consequences. And unfortunately, with the current views in our country, it's gotten even worse. And I have a couple of friends who have trans kids, and I have witnessed both the kids and the parents struggles. It's a really hard path for a transgender individual. But because I know the data around white men and anybody other than a white man have a very different path in terms of the obstacles they have to face constantly or periodically. So using the data-based argument to really enlighten leaders and male and female, because I would have grown up in the banking environment where I would never talk about mental health. I would never take a mental health day. It was just so stigmatized.
Mm-hmm.
But happily, I think that's one, I hate to say happily, that's one positive that came out of COVID. And right now, most workplaces are very focused on wellness, workplace wellness. That includes mental health, that includes giving access to gym memberships. In fact, I'm on a board for a company, and I was talking with one of the leaders today about an employee who is struggling mentally.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really impressed. This leader made a very strong suggestion that this employee take a mental health leave before they
Oh,
can. Yeah, and it's a beautiful, it's a Bay Area company, and just so
yeah.
impressed.
That's very impressive for a Bay Area company and like especially not just firing them and like giving them time off and like time to come back.
I'll tell you one last story because I think stories are powerful. One of
Yeah.
our alums who went to work at Google
Oh.
became ultimately through his path the director of health and wellness at Google.
Oh wow.
And then he confronted and faced a significant mental health crisis of his own.
Oh.
And he took a leave of absence and was very open about here's what's happening, here's how I'm feeling, I'm going to be taking a 9-month leave. And he's
Mhm.
also an Asian male and a power weightlifter.
Oh
And
my
he
goodness.
was super committed to not only doing this because it was the right thing to do, but to do this to role model specifically to the Asian American male community where culturally they are even
A lot
less.
of stigma, yeah.
So it's been watching leaders like him, and I bring him in to speak to my classes and having students watch successful. He's back in the workforce and quite successful. But he took a significant time out. And then he told another story that really touched me. He took his leave. He was lying on the couch at home, and at the time his daughter was maybe 6 years old, and he really was intentional about describing to her what he was going through. Obviously not in medical terms,
Yeah.
but he just said, look, dad's gonna be lying on the couch sometimes and cry a lot. It is not anything to do with you. It's just some things that dad is going through right now. So he didn't lay a
Oh,
lot on a 6-year-old, but wanted to
yeah.
explain what she would witness.
I think that transparency is so powerful, especially like having role models like that is just so important.
I don't want to be Pollyannish. It's not happening across the board. It's not
Yeah.
happening. Some industries, again, companies who now are led by women are more likely to have a focus on workplace wellness. And
Hmm.
even just from a cost perspective, healthy employees are able to return much higher value to the company. Burnout costs companies a lot of money.
Hmm. So in one of the bios I read on you, you talked about conscious inclusion. So what role do you think conscious inclusion plays in mental health?
Well, for those who are excluded, it has dire negative impact on their health. And the first thing for all of us, because we all are hardwired, not to intentionally exclude, not to intentionally exclude. We do it unintentionally
Hmm.
because all of us are hardwired with biases, with judgment. We carry our own self biases. So the first thing is to really help my students become aware of what some of their biases might be, or, even I just say narrow lens. For example, one of the things that I'm very aware of, not to get into politics, is that I tend to spend almost all of my time with people who are politically aligned with me.
Yeah,
That creates, you know,
a bubble.
yeah, and narrow understanding of, why are people voting differently, behaving differently. And I
Yeah.
can't justify a lot of it, but I can start to understand, for
Mhm.
example, in the Latino community, when Latino men aren't getting jobs or are losing jobs, that is really a bigger hit to their masculinity given the Hispanic Latino culture. So it helps me to understand why they would vote for a president who is promising them more jobs. I mean, that hasn't gone well now that we're seeing what's playing out. But
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's super important too. And like everyone, like regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, and this can be applied to many things, not just politics, like everyone, at the end of the day, they do believe they're right, right? And just as right as you believe you are, they're just as like ingrained in their beliefs and they think that they're doing the right thing. And at the end of the day, they also want the best for themselves, the best for their countries. We're more alike than we are different. We just like it's just really just taking the time to like maybe not go into things with bias and just understand. I mean, I'm also guilty of being in sort of like a echo chamber of people who repeat the same beliefs back to me. But I think it is really important to keep an open mind to people who are different, even if you don't understand, because that is the thing. You don't understand. You have to take time to understand.
I think to
Um,
understand is definitely a principle of equity fluent leadership. And
mhm.
I once had a student in my class, a business leader in my class, tell us in the classroom that her grandmother really tried to instill in the family to get curious before you get furious. And that really,
Yeah.
and it's hard. Like all of our angst is high on either end of, all ends of the spectrum because what we're witnessing.
Hmm.
It's hard. It's really hard to try to understand somebody who feels vastly different than
Yeah.
me.
And like I was part of a civics club last year and they would do political debates and stuff, but keep it respectful. And I honestly learned a lot about like the other side, I guess, and like what their beliefs were. And while like I still hold my own beliefs, at least I could understand where they were coming from. And I think it's really important that you do because if you spread more hatred without taking time to understand, then you're just as bad as the people you think.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so anyways, my final question to you was just you've done like obviously extensive work on gender equity and leadership. I actually did read some of your research on women in the workplace. I thought it was so cool. But I was just wondering, like, what advice do you have for young women or young people in general? Because I think like young men definitely need to hear this too. But just entering the workplace where they may face like stereotypes or misogyny and like also stigma about like maybe mental health or whatever. And how can they navigate those situations without compromising their confidence or career growth?
And I'm glad you put a focus on both men and women understand
Yeah.
because it takes everybody to
Yeah.
advance inclusion now more than ever.
Hmm.
But so for men, I'll start with men, to recognize when they have power to use their voice or their platform to amplify people who have less power. So I always try to think about, in any room, what power, when do I have the most power and when do I have the least power? Because when I have the most power in that room,
Hmm.
it is my obligation or responsibility as a good leader to try to remove barriers for other people.
Hmm.
Um, but I also realize that when I have the least power in the room, I have to really grab on to using my voice, because if you've always been the most powerful in any room, and I'm not blaming white men at all,
Hmm.
and factually, historically, since the start of
Yeah.
time, they have had the most power.
Hmm.
It's just I just say to my students, corporate or undergrad, and all the way in between, constantly look for moments in which you can include.
Hmm.
Be intentional in your inclusion. So tiny examples that can be life shifting. Even just today, I had a male CEO call me for some advice,
Hmm.
and he got called from a company looking for a CEO, and he knows a woman who would be a perfect fit for that job.
Hmm.
So he called her. He just came to me and said, I want to know if I'm doing the right thing. He called her, told her about the job, and she immediately started to give all of these reasons of why she wasn't ready. And he just said, let me just tell you all the reasons that I have observed why you are ready.
Okay.
And I said to him, like, that is railroad track shifting by having one person who believes deeply in you when you don't believe deeply in yourself. Maybe he sees things in her that she doesn't see herself, but can also pick up the phone to the other CEO and say, give her a chance. His question was, I don't know how hard to push her because if she doesn't want the job, I don't want to keep pushing her. And my advice was A, what you're doing is phenomenal. And B, push her in a way that is very clear, succinct. Here's what I see in you. Here's what the role needs. And even if she chooses to not put her name in the hat this time, it's still going to be embedded in her head so that when she is ready, if there's a thousand reasons why she may not be ready today.
Hmm.
Could be where she is in her personal life, whatever. But I said to him, what you're saying to her now is going to be ingrained in her if, in fact, this isn't the right position for the next time in which it's the right position.
Okay, yeah, that's so empowering. And I mean, kudos to him too. Like he did a great job with that.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely. And I want to just reiterate that there are men out there like that because we have really
yeah.
made the mistake of blaming and shaming, white men, and it's just not an effective strategy.
Yeah.
My dad used to tell me, you can choose to be right or you can choose to be effective.
Hmm.
He said, if you want to be the best leader, you'll choose to be effective.
I think that's a very inspirational message. This was like, thank you so much for your time. Like this, I was so excited for this interview specifically. And like you've been super insightful and I learned so much. And hopefully our listeners can also learn a lot too.
I'm glad, and you doing this is a great leadership move and really just amazing. And then people who are choosing to tune in and listen, male, female, all genders,
Hmm.
you got this. You got this.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. And is there anything else you wanted to add, or is that everything?
Thank you for doing the show and thanks for inviting me.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye. Take care.
You too.